So here we are out in the garage about to get some stuff done. So you guys been on me for the last couple weeks about when are you going to see some more China Vet content. Here it is, guys. We're finally installing the shift kit and I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, before we get started, I do want to say, although we're installing this in the C5 Corvette back here, this same procedure pretty much applies to any vehicle with a 4L60E transmission. That would be Chevy trucks, mainly, Camaros, what have you. If it's got a 4L60 in it, this shift kit will work, and the procedures that I'm about to show you will work. Also, full disclosure before we get started, I have never done this before. This is actually my first time installing one of these Trans-Go kits in a 4L60. I'm used to the old school little B&M shift kits, putting them in turbo 350s where you pretty much just drill the separator plate, get rid of some check balls, and you're done. So I'm going to be learning as we go along as well. And although I have researched online, I know a lot of people recommend a lot of different things to do to actually modify this kit. Since this is my first time doing it, I am going to stick to the instructions. There are a couple issues that I have looked at that I'm pretty sure we're already going to run into before we even get started, so I'll cover those in a minute. But for now, I'm going to show you the shift kit and what all is in there. All right, everybody, so here is our Trans-Go shift reprogramming kit. This is a high-performance shift kit. It comes with different levels you can adjust to. Anything from your hauler, which we may actually, depending on how this goes, we may install another one of these in our Avalanche car hauler. You can adjust the shift firmness for, you know, just a little bit more firm, like I said, for a car hauler or four-wheel drive application, to, you know, a little more firm for street or strip, or even firmer for all-out race. We're probably going to kind of shoot for something in the middle, guys. Keep in mind the China Vet is a daily driver. This is, you know, honestly, my wife drives this car to work probably 2 to 3 days a week at least. So we don't want it breaking her neck on the shifts. The main thing we're going for here is we're trying to get rid of that sloppy shift that's costing us probably a half a second on our ETs. So that being said, we're going to open the box. So first up, we got our instructions here, page by page. I'm going to talk to you about that in just a minute. A cork gasket, which we're most likely not going to use. Then we have all our parts here. Now, parts that apply to different sections of the transmission are in their own bags. I kind of like the way Trans-Go did that. They didn't just throw everything together in one bag. So, you know, if there's something you don't want to do, for instance, if you don't want to do, I believe this is the manual valve. You know, if you don't want to do that, where it gives you full manual control, you don't have to do that. You can just leave that stuff in the bag. These are the parts for your servo on the side of the transmission. That's one issue we're actually going to have. If you lift this out, got your nice little Trans-Go sticker here, valve body gaskets, and you have your clutch spring kit. Now, in order to install this, you actually have to take the transmission apart. Since we are not removing the transmission from the vehicle, we are not going to be able to install these. Not a big deal. This is actually an optional piece. With that being said, in my case, we have another issue, and that is the servo on the side of the transmission. Guys, I have been under the car. I'm going to get a better look at it once I get under there. But from what I'm seeing and from everything I have read online, it is pretty much impossible to get the servo out of the side of this C5 to install the shims and this helper spring in the servo without either removing the transmission from the vehicle or at bare minimum dropping the rear end to allow the transmission to come down enough to be able to pull this out the side. So It seems to be pretty common practice in C5 world to leave this part out for now. Now, I do want to say, for those of you who don't know, in the C5 Corvette, the transmission is mounted in the rear. So you may be thinking, you know, if you didn't know that, you may be thinking, hey man, why don't you just lower the cross member, drop the back of the transmission, get that servo out. It is not that easy in a C5, guys. You actually have to take the whole rear cradle, the rear end, everything has to drop to get the transmission in and out. You have to deal with the torque tube that runs all the way to the front of the car. It is a pain in the rear, and that's why I'm choosing to not do anything to the servo on the side of the transmission until a later date when we have to take the transmission out of the car anyway. At that point, we'll probably do a lot more than that, guys, because while the transmission's out, it really doesn't make any sense to me not to upgrade some other internal parts such as the sun shell and maybe a few other things. So one other thing that I did buy is this accumulator piston online. I bought an aluminum one. I know in some of these transmissions they use a plastic accumulator piston in some of them, so they recommend when you're doing this kit that you go ahead and upgrade to the aluminum. This thing was like $7 online. I'll probably put a link in the description, as well as a link to this kit in the description. But the deal with this is, if we need it, you know, if there's a plastic one in there, we're going to replace it with this. If it's already got the aluminum one in there, we're probably going to replace it with this anyway, just because, you know, it may be worn out in the middle, but we'll see when we get in there. One last thing before we drain the transmission fluid, I do want to make a note of this before we even start the video. I got this filter. They had this filter listed for the C5 Corvette. This filter to me looks like the deep pan 4L60 filter, and I do not think it's going to work with the C5 transmission pan. We'll find out. If it does not work, we will address that later in the video. We are under the car, and there are actually two different procedures I want to address as far as draining the oil. Now, if you are working on a C5 like I am, then over here on the driver's side, the back of the pan, you will find a drain plug. This is not just a drain plug, guys. This is a drain and fill plug. This is the only way you have to get transmission fluid in or out of the transmission on a C5. There's no dipstick. I will go over the fill procedure later, but for now, the drain procedure is we put a drain pan under it and we pull this plug. If the vehicle you're working on does not have a drain plug, such as most trucks, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go around and loosen the bolts either at the front or the back of the pan. Get you a very large drain pan to cover a large surface area, or you will make a mess. And once you get all the bolts out except for maybe the back row, you're going to start loosening that back row. Pry the front of the pan loose, or you can choose to loosen the front row, pry the back of the pan loose, and you're going to kind of have to let the pan drain a little bit that way. Once it drains down enough to where you think you can handle the pan without dumping transmission fluid all over yourself, then you're going to hold the pan while you take the last remaining bolts out, and you're going to slowly lower the pan down. Now, again, I don't have to deal with that because we have a drain plug. So I'm going to get that taken loose, let all the fluid drain out. So the fluid is almost finished draining. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put the plug back in to stop the drain. And I'm going to take loose 16 13 millimeter bolts around the outside of the pan and drop it. And I'm a cheater, so I'm going to use Mr. Milwaukee. All right, down to one bolt. I'm going to take that bolt loose and hold tension on the pan and lower it down as I take the bolt out. Now, just a word of advice, make sure you leave your drain pan underneath the transmission. Guys, this thing could literally drip for like 4 days and would still be dripping. Just take my word for it. When you think it's done dripping, it's not done dripping. If you wipe it off, it's still not done dripping. So just leave your pan under here, and we're going to take our pan off the bottom of the transmission. We're going to set it right here, And as we start taking parts off, we're just going to set them in the pan for now. That'll give us a convenient way to carry them over to the workbench later. So I'm just going to start with the transmission filter. We're just going to kind of pull down on it towards the front of the transmission. A little side-to-side movement as you pull down, and it should pop free. Go ahead and drain it into our drain pan here. And we'll go ahead and set it in the transmission pan. The next thing I'm going to recommend doing is taking your cell phone and taking a picture of where everything plugs in here, guys. Just in case you get kind of confused later, you can just come over here, take your cell phone, take a picture, good to go for later. You'll be able to refer back to that picture because we're fixing to unplug all these electrical connectors. So after you've taken your picture, you want to start unplugging your connectors. Be very careful, guys. Some of these connectors could be brittle and they will break. If they break, you're going to have no choice but to replace the entire harness. But just go ahead, go through here, unplug all these electrical connectors. Then we're going to pull this little pin out that retains this solenoid. Try not to have it go flying across the room. We're going to pull this solenoid out to give us access to the two bolts that are holding in the TCC solenoid. We're going to take the two bolts loose from the TCC solenoid with a 10mm socket, wiggle it out while pulling down. You're going to pop the harness loose from all its attachment points and drape it over to the side out of your way. At that point, you're going to want to move your drain pan over underneath this to keep it from dripping everywhere. Now in my case, no matter where I let it dangle, it was still going to be in my way when I start removing the valve body. So I just went ahead and zip tied it to the exhaust over here. Now the next thing I'm going to do, using the 10mm again, I'm going to remove these 3 bolts here and lower down the second accumulator. There are a series of springs and pistons behind here, so you want to be careful as you're lowering this down, you don't drop any of that into the transmission fluid. Remember what I said the other day about how I do all the work, the filming, the editing, all by myself? Well, yeah, sometimes it's a pain in the butt, guys. But you can look in here and you can see the second accumulator piston, and it looks like it is in fact plastic, so I'm glad I bought that replacement. We're just going to take this guy, set it in the transmission pan with all our other goodies. And the next thing I'm going to do is remove these 3 10mm bolts and these 2 8mm bolts and drop this pressure manifold. And we're going to put them in the pan. Now we're going to take out the 13mm bolt for our shift detent spring, remove that, and we're going to remove all the 10mm screws from the valve body except this one right in the middle. We're going to leave that in there to hold it up. I'm now going to remove these 3 8mm screws here. Once I do that, I'm going to hold on to this while I remove this center bolt and lower the whole valve body down. Now I would love to do one of those cool little videos where I show myself slowly lowering it down in a dramatic fashion, but like I said, guys, I'm out here all by myself. So I'm just telling you what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to do it off camera because, well, quite frankly, I don't have 3 hands. What I can warn you about is upon loosening that middle screw ever so slightly, this thing started draining, dumping fluid everywhere. So be on the lookout for that, guys. As a matter of fact, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to let this drain a few minutes and I'm going to go grab me something to drink. I managed to get the valve body off. One little thing I wanted to let you guys know. Over here you have your, well, it's your shift linkage, guys. It goes to your manual shift valve, and it's kind of like a little Z shape. Well, what you have to do is, once you start to lower the valve body, you have to kind of bring it over toward the passenger side about 1 inch, and then this guy will slip right out of the manual valve, and you'll be able to lower the valve body down after that. And just like everything else, we just put it in the transmission pan here. The only thing we have left is to take these 3 8mm bolts out to remove that plate. That is currently the only thing holding our separator plate up. Now keep in mind, guys, there is a check ball. Most of the check balls are in the valve body, but there is a check ball above this plate right up, oh, there it is, right here. So when you're lowering this down, you don't want to lose that guy. I'm going to get those 3 bolts out, set this in the pan along with the check ball that I'm not going to freaking lose, and then I'll take everything over to the bench and I'll see you guys then. Almost forgot. We've got this one last accumulator piston here that needs to come out, and it looks like it's going to make a mess, but we're going to take the pin that's through the center and we're just going to wiggle it. I'm going to use 2 hands for this, guys, but just keep wiggling. You can see it's coming down the board, but we need to get that guy out of there. So I'm going to set the camera down, get that out of there, and then I will meet you guys at the bench. So here on the bench, we have all our goodies. Now, I'm ashamed to say I'm going to have to take a few minutes to clean this GoPro because it got a bath in transmission fluid. Not good. But I do recommend kind of cleaning off some of these parts with brake clean. You don't have to get real intricate with it unless you've got a lot of grit and grime. You can kind of tell, like, I've got a thin layer of clutch materials, but nothing bad really. I mean, this transmission actually, judging from the pan and everything, it looks like it's in pretty good shape. So I'm basically just going to clean off my separator plate here, take my little filters out. We actually have a modification we have to do to this one. I'm just going to spray off the valve body a little bit to clean it up, clean up all my other little parts here, clean the pan up real good. And honestly, guys, I'm going to let the transmission drain overnight so that when I go to put this back together, I'm not getting dripped fluid all over, or at least not just getting it dumped on me. Now, I was just organizing all my bolts here, just kind of wiping them off. And I wanted to show you guys this before I actually dump this pan. You know, there is very minimum clutch material. Of course, we have some around the magnet here, as you usually will, but overall, for a pan with oh, sorry guys, that came off the magnet, for a transmission with 78,000 miles on it, and one that I personally have beat the crap out of, I think this thing's in pretty good shape. I mean, the fluid was even nice and red and everything, so I think our transmission's in good shape, and I think we're good to go to put the shift kit in. Alright guys, so here we are. All our parts are cleaned. We got everything kind of laid out here, ready to go. We got our pan all cleaned up, and we are going to start the modifications now. I'm going to go ahead, do everything that I can up here on the bench first, even though it might be slightly out of order from the instructions, and then we'll move under the car where you're probably not going to be able to see what the hell I'm doing because I don't have anybody to hold the camera. But I'm going to give it my best shot, guys. So we go to page 1, and of course the first thing it tells you to do is for the band adjustment with the servo on the side of the transmission here. Like I said earlier in the video, guys, I don't think I can get this out. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to skip that for now. For now, I'll just let you kind of see the instructions. Basically, all you're doing is pulling the servo out of the side of the transmission there. And in this package, you've got this blue spring. It's going to go inside of the spring right here that's already in there. And then you've got these shims. You can add these shims here to adjust the band to either make it tighter or looser. Most people that I have read about say don't even use the shims. Most people, all they do is put this spring in, put it all back together. Again, guys, that's all there is to it. You're adding a spring. Most people leave out the shims, and the 2 O-rings are just gaskets to replace the O-ring gaskets that you already have. So moving on, we have our second accumulator. And what it says here to do, that's this guy right here, What it says to do is remove and discard the original springs, install the piston as shown. Even if it wasn't installed that way originally, it's okay. And obviously mine is not installed that way originally. It's actually flipped upside down. And again, we're getting rid of the plastic one and replacing it with this metal one. When it comes to these spacers here, it says this is to adjust the 1-2 shift firmness. One spacer is supposed to be a crisp shift. 2 spacers is supposed to be very firm for street and strip, and 3 is full race with high stall converters. Here's the deal, guys. You're actually doing a lot of different things to adjust the feel of these shifts, okay? So later on, we're going to drill our separator plate. When we do that, you know, basically, if you put in 3 spacers and open up the holes to full race, this thing's going to hit hard as hell. I'm going to actually, when I do the holes, well, you'll see. But for now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go with 1 spacer when I put this together. I'm hoping it won't be too harsh, but if it is, the truth is, guys, it's not a huge pain to drop this pan. You can actually take this off without removing, you know, the valve body and everything. So it really wouldn't be a big deal to have to drop the pan again if this is too firm of a shift and take that spacer out. So I'm going to start off with the spacer. I'm going to show you how I'm putting that together now according to these instructions. So we're using this baggie. It's got the spacers, the spring seat, a red spring, and a blue spring. We're going to take our 1-2 accumulator. I'm getting rid of this. And it says to discard the old springs. According to the instructions, we're going to go with 1 spacer. Put our spring seat in, you know, with the beveled edge up. Then we've got our blue spring. Then we've got our new piston here, and we're actually installing it, you know, originally it was like this, but according to the instructions, we're flipping it over and installing it like this. Actually going to take some petroleum jelly, Vaseline, and smear it around this seal. I don't know if I'm going to edit it or not, but I actually just tried to put it in with no lubrication, and it didn't want to go in. So I'm going to lubricate the edge here, and then hopefully she's going to pop in. A little bit of pressure. There it goes. All right. So now we're popped in. Make sure it's not bound up. Yes, we're good. Take our red spring, put it right on top, and we're going to set this guy aside. Now, moving right along. Oh, yes. Going over here to valve body. So we'll bring him over in the picture. And the first thing we're going to do, step 1, it says remove and discard the original spring. Install tight wound purple spring. Appears to be them. And here's our tight wound purple spring. Twist this solenoid up to get out of the way. And we've got a little spring clip here that we need to pull out. And I don't know if this is going to pop out. It feels like it is spring loaded. So I'm just going to keep some tension on that with my thumb. And we're going to pull this little spring clip out here. And try to have it not go flying across the room. So there's a spring clip. I'm going to set it over here. I'm going to slowly let this guy come out. And we can see this spring, which is obviously not wound anywhere near as tight as that one. So it came out like that. And then there is a valve in there. I'm just going to check to see that that valve moves freely, and it is. It's moving freely, guys. So there's really no need for me to remove that valve completely. All I need to do is open my bag and get my purple spring out. We're just going to put our purple spring back down in here. We're going to put our plug back in the end, and we're going to put our clip back in. Step 2, it says Grande manual valve for faster reverse release. Totally not worried about that, guys. I would just skip this step. It's not a big deal, and I'm not going to do it. I don't care about the reverse release thing. But basically, all you're going to do, if you choose to do this step, you're going to take your manual valve here. You're going to take it over to a grinder, and you're just going to bevel this edge right here. You're just going to bevel this edge, knock the edge off, and well, you know, as you can see here, bevel that edge all the way around. Like I said, I'm not worried about that. Totally not going to do that. Step 3 is we remove this solenoid, and all we're going to do is take our large white spring here. We're going to take our large white spring and we're going to put it inside of the spring that's already in there. I believe we're going to need an 8mm to pull this off. Remove our little tension spring there. Going to carefully pull our solenoid out. So you're going to have another clip to deal with. This clip is pretty deep in here, guys, but if you flip the valve body over, you should be able to take a small screwdriver and you can push down on the clip, kind of work it out. At least that's what I'm going to try. Yeah, and I think it is just about out now. So we're going to flip it back over. Yeah, you can see it's about out. So I'm going to hold my finger over the hole here, so hopefully nothing shoots out, and finish pulling the clip. Oh, and I'm glad I had my finger over that because stuff was definitely shooting out. Just keep working it until the ends, or till the cap starts coming out the end there. And finish pulling it out. There we go. Now we're going to take our large white spring and we're going to put it in there in the middle of the spring that's already in there. Jiggle it a little bit. Make sure it's seated. We'll stick our cap back in. It in with a screwdriver and get our clip back in there. If you count right here, the cracks, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 4th crack is where that clip needs to go. So you've actually got to push this pretty hard. I'm going to try to do it on camera here. It's going to take 4 hands for me to do it. There we go. Yeah, there is a lot of tension on that. Now, there we go. It snapped in. Clip snapped in. Now I can put my solenoid in. It should slide right in there. Yeah, there we go. We're good now. Put our little clip back on and tighten her down. That drama out of the way, we move on to step 4. All right, a little explanation here, guys. If you go all the way back to right here where you're doing the band adjustment, the part that we skipped, step 1 with the servo, it tells you in here to look at the part number on the case of your servo here, your second servo. And according to the part number, it's like the last 3 digits of the part number. That's going to tell you what spring to use in the next step. What I'm telling you to do is invest $15 more before you buy this kit, and just go ahead and get you a Corvette servo, guys. It's an upgrade. They're literally like $15 on eBay, and this is what you get for $15. I actually bought this. I'm planning on doing a install of this in the Avalanche in the future. You guys will see that. But as long as you have the Corvette servo, you don't have to worry about it. If you've got a Corvette servo, you're going to use the white spring here. So this came out of a Corvette. Obviously, we have a Corvette servo, so we're going to use the white spring in our next step. And the next step is to pull the accumulator piston out of this bore right here. Now to do that, there is a roll pin right here. I hope you guys can see that. There's a roll pin right here in this little hole. We're going to have to knock that out. You can see the end of it there. So all we're going to do is take a screwdriver and push it up this way. And stab ourselves in the thumb. Then we're going to hold a finger in here so stuff doesn't go flying, which it didn't anyway. We're going to pull our roll pin out, set it over here, and we're going to pull our accumulator out. And just like we did the last one, when I say puncture your thumb, I wasn't kidding, guys. There you go. That roll pin just got me in the thumb. We're going to do the same thing we did on our last one here. We're going to use our screwdriver to work the valves in here. If you have a hook like this, we'll see if that works. May be able to get in there and grab something and pull it out. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to slide him right out. He's a little gunked up, so I think I'm actually going to clean this before I put it back in. I'm not sure. On most of these, if you're supposed to discard it, it says to discard it. This one doesn't say discard. So but it doesn't even show it on the picture, guys. So I'm kind of thinking I'm supposed to discard it, so I'm going to set it over here. And this guy just goes on the end here. Then the whole valve goes back in, and we shove our roll pin in. I really hope I'm not supposed to be putting this in on top of the one that's already in there. Surely not. That would be a lot of pressure. There's a little bore in there, guys, you can try to get that spring to drop into. Actually, I don't trust it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and clean these parts real quick, and then I'll come back, I'll set the spring on here, and then I'll just slide it in. You've got to get this valve in just the right position, because the roll pin has to go through the hole in it, guys. There we go. And that shouldn't take much force. We'll just kind of tap on it with the end of our little screwdriver. That's flush. Now the instructions say to look right down through here, and that's the spring we just put in, and make sure that the spring is not crooked or in a bind. And I can see the spring is not in a bind. So moving right along to step 5. Step 5 is we are replacing the 1-2 shift valve. I am not 100% certain on this, so feel free to chime in the comments if you know better than me, which you probably do. But I believe this new shift valve is what gives you the full manual capability, the ability to downshift in any gear. You know, it still retains automatic capability, guys, but it'll give you the ability to instantly shift up or down to any gear. So if you don't want that, if you don't care about that, you can probably just skip this whole step. Again, I'm not 100% sure though. Right here is our shift solenoid. We're going to flip this up on its end, pull another one of our famous pins. So we're going to pull our shift solenoid out here, set it over to the side, And we're going to remove our 1-2 shift valve. Our kit actually comes with a new shift valve. Just to hold it up for comparison there, you can kind of see the difference in the two. We also have a gold check ball that's going to go on the end of the shift valve, and a green spring that's going to go on top of that check ball in the end of the valve. So we're going to start by putting our new valve in, and I'm just going to kind of keep an eye down in here and watch my spring to make sure nothing binds or anything. And that seems to be moving nice and free. So at this point, I'm going to set it up. I'm going to drop my check ball in the end of the shift valve there. I'm going to take the green spring, which honestly looks more yellow, but I'm sure it's the right spring because it was in the same bag. I'm going to drop it in there as well. We're going to take our shift solenoid. We're going to stick it back in there. And we're going to put our little clip back in. And boom, just like that. I believe that is what gives us the full manual control. Moving on to the next page. Now guys, we will be using the page we were just on as a reference. This page actually has the locations of all the check balls on the valve body side here. It has all the check ball locations marked on it. So after I finish the next step, once we go to put the separator plate on, we'll refer back to this page and make sure we take all our check balls and put them in the appropriate holes. Now, on to this page, we are replacing the Iso Qov valve. I'm just going to read through the instructions. It says, remove and discard the converter regulator valve, spring and isolator valve. That's all these things, guys, right here. There are 3 different types here, and it doesn't matter what type you have. You're going to discard all this, and we're going to be replacing it with this. We've got another one of our friends, Mr. Clip, here. So we're going to pull Mr. Clip. This will be the one that ends up going across the room, guys. Alright, looks like this one is going to be another one that we need to push off from the back side. So I'm going to hold my thumb over it and push that clip down. I'm going to have to edit this just so you guys don't have to watch me struggle. But I'll make it perfectly clear that I was struggling. Oh, this ain't too bad. There we go. So we got him out, and we're going to do the same thing that we did with our other ones, where we take our screwdriver, pop our plug out here, and let's see, can we just shake it out? Shake it out? We should be able to. There we go. There's all the parts. No, there's more in there. We just want to look down in there, make sure there's nothing left. It says to insert the new valve into the bore using a hex bolt as a handle, and it comes with the hex bolt in this bag here. Push the valve in and out at least 20 times with slight side pressure. The valve must fall in and out of the bore. Clean the bore, remove the bolt, install blue spring and Iso converter valve. So what they want us to do is basically ream the bore with the new valve. You could probably just go to town on this, guys. So I'm just going to thread it into the end there. We're going to stick it in the bore. Wait, it just falls in already. It says to run it in and out at least 20 times with slight side pressure. But I'm telling you guys, this thing's just... like, it just falls in already, so I don't think we got a problem here. I'm going to go ahead, clean the bore out, and install this. We'll drop our blue spring in. we'll drop our new valve in. And you can see it does drop in just like it said. It said it should just drop in, and it does. And we'll take our screw out here. Again, it dropped in. And we're going to take our plug. Put our plug back in. And, oh, wrong side. Come over here and put our clip back in. And with that, it says you just fixed this valve body. So we are completely finished with the valve body, guys. We're moving on. The next thing we have to do is under the vehicle, and I told you earlier we're going to save the in-vehicle stuff for later. So we're going to move on now to drilling the separator plate. Now before we do this, I do want to make a note of something. You can see on some of these, you can tell where the check balls were at, guys, because you can see where they've kind of been hammering the plate. Now this one doesn't really have a whole lot of wear. I mean, it doesn't look like the balls are about to bust through or anything. But you can buy a new plate pretty cheap from a transmission shop. So if you're worried about it, I would suggest just going and spending, you know, the $15 or whatever and buying the new plate. But if the holes don't look too bad, then you can just go ahead and roll with your old one. That's actually my one complaint from this kit is, you know, when I used to use the B&M kits in the old days on the old Turbo 350s and stuff, they always came with a new separator plate. I kind of feel like for what you pay for this, it should come with a new separator plate too, but it doesn't, so just keep what I just said in mind. Now, moving along, I am not going to walk you through every hole I drill, and that's because, well, quite frankly, you may decide to drill them differently than I. So basically, I'm going for the bottom level on everything, guys. I am just trying to tighten up the shifts. This is not a race car, regardless of what some of you may think. This is not a race car. I'm just trying to firm up the shifts. So I'm going to go on the low end on everything. Like, for instance, the 1-2 shift, this hole right here, it tells you, it says, for a short shift, drill it to 0.82. For full race and high stall, drill it to 0.93. Well, obviously, I don't have a stall converter or a high stall converter, and I'm not going for full race. So my 1-2 hole right here is going to get a 82 bit. They do provide you with an 82 and a 93 in the kit. Now, on some of these, it will tell you for full race to go all the way up to a 0.101. They do not provide that bit, guys. So on some of these holes that require a 0.101, if you really want to open them up, you're going to have to go buy that bit. That's not a problem for me. From the looks of this, it looks like I'm drilling all the holes to 0.93 except the 1-2 shift hole, and that one is going to 0.82. So I'm going to get on that. The only tip I really have to offer you on this, guys, is clean your plate really well. You do not want to drill the wrong hole. So my suggestion is clean your plate really well, and then go through with a Sharpie and mark the holes that you're going to be drilling. And that way, you know, you don't screw up. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to make sure I'm on the correct holes, and I'm going to mark this plate, and then I'll come back and show you how I've marked it. You can see what I've done is I've went through and I've marked my number next to all the holes, you know, 93, 93. And I do want to say some of these holes are actually already drilled out even larger. Like, that's probably 1.01 already. It's bigger than this 93. And it says on the paper, if they're, you know, some of them are already larger, that's okay. But I definitely need to drill out my 2.3 here to a 93. And I definitely need to drill out my 1-2 shift here to a 82. So I'm going to go ahead and drill all these out, and I'll be right back. Once you've drilled all your holes to the size you want, just take your drill bit and check. Make sure it goes in them, you know, easily, just slides in and out of the appropriate size hole. then check, make sure you didn't raise any burrs. If you did, you're going to want to take a file or something and clean the burr off. You don't want to leave a burr in there. All right, guys, so moving along, we're going to go ahead and put our check balls in now. As I stated earlier, there is a diagram here showing you the location of every check ball. But honestly, it's pretty easy to determine where they go. I'm going to pull one back out here. You can kind of see everywhere there is supposed to be a check ball, there's a little indent there. So it's pretty hard to get confused. We'll pull this out. You can see there's a little indent there. Same with this one. You know, there's a little, I mean, it's pretty obvious to see where they go. It's time to move on to the gaskets. We have two gaskets here, guys. We have a gasket that says CA, which stands for case. And we have a gasket that says VB, that stands, of course, for valve body. So we're going to lay our valve body gasket right here on top of the valve body. Then we have our separator plate that's going to lay on top of that. Now, before we put the separator plate on that, the instructions tell us to install this little wire spacer right here inside of our larger filter. This is to keep the filter from being sucked shut under pressure. So basically, we're just going to put that inside here, and we're going to lay our separator plate on here, and that should hold it in. There we go, just like that. Try to line up your holes. This isn't super important at this very moment to line up the holes, because what we're going to do, I mean, you want to get them as close as possible, but once we get under the vehicle, we're going to put some bolts in there to make sure we keep all the holes straight. For now, just try to get them as close as you can. Then we have our CA gasket, our case gasket, and that's going to go on top of here. Again, the CA stands for case, so if you get confused, just remember the valve body gasket, the VB gasket, is going to be closest to the valve body, and the case gasket is going to be closest to the transmission case. Now, we do actually have one check ball that is going to go on top of the separator plate instead of underneath it. So what we're going to do, we're going to take just a little dab of our Vaseline here, and we're going to put it right here where that check ball goes, and we're going to stick the check ball in there so it doesn't fall out. There we go. With that finished, we are about to go back under the car. Before we do, I want to make sure we have everything together. So right here we have our fourth accumulator, which is this guy right here, and we have this yellow spring that's going to go into the accumulator. So we're going to take this spring, we're just going to set it in here. I'm actually going to lube this seal just a little bit with some Vaseline to hopefully make it slide up in the transmission a little easier. And with that being said, we're going back under the car. Back under the car, we have our fourth accumulator piston and spring that we just assembled, and we're going to push them right back up into the bore, just like that. She's working good. With that done, we're going to turn our attention to the pressure valve right here in the front of the transmission. You are going to need a pair of snap ring pliers to get this out, and I'm not sure how well I'm going to be able to hold the camera to show you guys this as I'm doing it. I apologize, I was not able to get a camera angle of me removing the snap ring. It was just pretty much impossible. I do have the wifey out here holding the camera though, so you can see the valve coming out. So we pull the valve out, and there's a spring on the back of the valve, just like this. We're going to take a screwdriver, wiggle it up in there a little bit, and get the rest of this out. Oh, almost dropped it. Come on out. Yeah, and we can see we got this valve right here. So back over here on the workbench, you can see the parts we just took out. Of course, this was all together. This guy was in here, this is in here, and this spring was in here. So that's what we just pulled out, guys. Now, as per the instructions, we are going to replace these parts. We're getting rid of this, and both these springs. We have our new boost valve assembly here. We have this new spring, and Trans-Go was even kind enough to give us a new snap ring. We also have this spacer. So here's how this goes, guys. This spacer goes over this. This goes in here. That's your boost valve assembly. This original part goes back up in the transmission. Then this spring goes inside of this spring. On top of this, we put it all back in, hold it up with a screwdriver, and put the snap ring in. Now, once again, I'm probably not going to be able to get decent footage of me putting the snap ring in, and it's not because I'm hiding anything from you guys. It's because I'm going to be honest, I struggle with these snap rings. It does help to have a second person. You may need to have someone to hold this up with a screwdriver while you install the snap ring. All right, guys, so like I said, we're going to use the spring. I'm going to shove this guy up in here. Try to work it around. It's got a hole it's got to go into. It's way up in there, guys. I don't know if my fingers are small enough to do this. All right, yep. So that stayed. What I'm going to try to do is go ahead and get my snap ring set on my snap ring pliers. Just like that. Like I said, guys, I'm probably going to have to fight with this snap ring for a while, so you might not see that because there might be 10 minutes of me cussing and trying to get this snap ring in. But we got our little spring inside our big spring. We're going to set that on top of our boost valve right here, just like that, and slide him up in there too. Just like that. Make sure it moves freely. And we're going to try to hold our boost valve up with our screwdriver while we put our snap ring in. It was in fact a pain in the butt, but we got it in there. The valve still moves freely and everything, so we're good to go. So for the separator plate, the first thing we want to do is just get it up here, get it held in place. So what we're going to do, we're going to take one of our very short bolts, and we're going to set our separator plate up and just thread that center bolt in for now, just to hold it. Don't worry too much about the gasket right now, guys. We're going to put some alignment bolts in there in just a second. We want to take a couple longer bolts and thread them in a few spots just to kind of line up the gasket, make sure, well, like I just said, make sure everything stays lined up. So I'm going to run one in here, one in down here. You know what? Let's go in this corner down here. Make sure you do not lose this check ball that we stuck with Vaseline up here earlier. Next, we're going to put our second accumulator on. So it's just going to go right up here. Going to thread a couple bolts in to get it started. We do have the stiffer spring in it, so it is going to give a little bit of resistance. Now I'm going to go around, tighten these bolts evenly, just rotating out. But I'm not going to final torque them yet, guys. We'll go over all the bolts and do a final torquing once everything is on here. Next, we're going to put on our little plate, and we're going to be using these kind of short screws here. Well, other than the TCC solenoid screws, these are the shortest screws. Take out your bolts that you were using to align the gasket there, and take out your middle bolt. Now, I don't like how this gasket's kind of flopping here, so probably what I'm going to do is smear a little Vaseline on the back side of the plate here and stick the gasket to it to just kind of hold it while I set the valve body on. Next thing going on is the valve body itself, and I just want to say this, on the instructions you have right here, it shows you all the different bolts, A bolts, B bolts, C bolts, D bolts, and this picture is actual size, guys. So you can come over here and compare the bolts. So I'm not going to call them out when I'm doing it, but if you look in the instructions, you know, it tells you you've got, over here you've got 3 A bolts, and that's this length. All 3 of them go here. You know, it shows you where all the C bolts go. You've only got 2 D bolts. Those go down here, the side of the transmission. So pretty easy stuff, guys. The main thing is, you're going to see in the video, you need to kind of move the valve body around, make sure you get everything lined up. Don't tighten anything down until all the bolts are in, because you know, you don't want to risk crinkling your gasket or anything like that. What we want to do, as we lift the valve body up, make sure we get our manual valve linkage in the valve body, and then just let it roll forward. Then we're just going to set the valve body up. And we're going to put a C bolt right here in the middle. Then, to make sure our gasket stays lined up, we're going to put one of our longer A bolts right here, and one of our D bolts over here in the corner. Now you're going to put the remaining bolts in according to the diagram in your instructions. Now you can just snug all these up if you'd like, but if you're looking for a torque spec, guys, it's 8 foot-pounds for all these bolts. Now we're just going to go around, start plugging all of our harness back in to all of our solenoids here. If you need to, refer back to the picture you took at the beginning of the video. And then when we get down here, we've got our torque converter, our TCC solenoid. So we're going to put that back up in the hole, work it up in there, put in our 2 little stubby bolts. Then we're going to put our solenoid back on the end here. In there, put our clip back in, and that's our last plug. Don't forget, over on this side we've got our detent spring for our gear selector. Can't forget to put that back in. One last thing, before we put the pan on, we need to put our filter on. Should be a nice snug fit. There we go. Pops right in. Got him lined up. Let's go prep our pan. As far as the pan gasket goes, this is kind of personal preference. A lot of people will just throw them on there dry. A lot of people will glob a shit ton of Permatex on there, and then they'll leak like crazy. Me personally, the way I like to do this is I just like to take the Permatex and not even really lay a bead. I like to just smear it, just a very, very, very thin layer, and it's more to hold the gasket in place than anything, but also to, you know, help seal possible leaks. We're going to put our pan on. Our gasket is on top of our pan, already lined up. It is being held in place with some Permatex. So we should be able to just start our bolt holes, or start our bolts, I'm sorry. The holes are already there, we're not starting those. So I'll just get kind of one in each corner here. Then we're going to put all 16 bolts in, and we're going to tighten those to 9 foot-pounds. Guys, I cannot stress this enough. Do not over tighten these bolts. The number one reason for leaks on an automatic transmission, people will over tighten these bolts. It will warp the flanges around the holes, and it'll start seeping oil or seeping transmission fluid. So yes, 9 foot-pounds is the spec on this. That's I think 106 inch-pounds if you want to use a 1/4 inch drive torque wrench, but that's the specs. I'm gonna get it done. Okay guys, we're finally wrapping this up. Now, if you're doing this on a truck, a van, a Camaro, some kind of other car, all you've got left to do is fill the transmission up with transmission fluid, start the car while it's still on jack stands, kind of go through all the gears, make sure the fluid's getting circulated throughout the valve body, and then take it for a test drive. Since I'm doing this particular installation on a Corvette, a C5 Corvette, I'm going to throw this last little step in there for all the C5 guys so they understand how to fill their transmission fluid. I do want to throw this in here for all you guys that like to watch the videos and ask me what fluids I prefer. Guys, I have been using this Jegs quick shift fluid for probably 10 years now. I use it in everything. It's been in all the performance builds that we've done on this channel. It's also in all of my stock vehicles. I am not sponsored by Jegs in any way, but I do want to say this, guys. Even when I put this in a bone stock transmission, it does seem to firm up the shifts. It also says runs up to 30% cooler than standard grade transmission fluids. I have not verified this, but judging from the change in shift feel that I usually get when I swap out to quick shift, it would not surprise me if it did cause the transmission to run cooler just due to less slippage. Now, the fill procedure on the C5 Corvette, like I just said, you're going to need some transmission fluid, and you're going to need some sort of pump to pump the fluid into the vehicle. So just covering this as quickly as possible, guys, because this video is running extremely long. The fill plug that I showed you in the beginning of the video that we drained the transmission with, we are also going to fill it with. The procedure for that, what you're going to want to do, you're going to want to get the car as level as possible. Pull this out. You're going to pump transmission fluid into the pan until it just starts to dribble out. That means it's even with the level of this hole, of the drain hole. Once it gets to that level, you're going to start the car while it's still on jack stands, still level, and let it start circulating the fluid. As it is circulating the fluid, you're going to come under here with the vehicle still running, and you're going to continue to pump transmission fluid in, again, with the vehicle still running until it starts to dribble out the hole again. At that point, you're going to discontinue pumping the fluid in, you're going to screw your fill plug back in, and you're done. Once you finish doing that, then the procedure is the same as the trucks, the other cars. You're going to want to run it through the gears while it's on the jack stands. Don't give it any gas, guys. Just bring it down to reverse, to drive, to D3 to 2 to 1. Just run it through the gears for a few seconds in each gear. That's going to help the transmission fluid to circulate through the valve body. Then you're going to be ready to go for your test drive. And as for my test drive, well, you're going to have to wait till the next video for that. This video is already pushing at least an hour long, guys. So I'm going to get in here, get this edited. It's going to take a long time to edit and upload for you guys. But if you're watching this video, I hope it helped you out. I hope it gives you the confidence to tackle this job yourself. If it did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, share it with someone else who may need it. Thanks again for watching. Now get out in the garage, get something done, and I'll see you next time here on Bad Luck Garage.